The scream that tore through the marble lobby of Chen, technologies that Tuesday morning would haunt Sarah. Chen for the rest of her life, not because of its terror, but because of what she almost destroyed in its aftermath. Sarah had built her empire from nothing. At 38, she was the youngest female billionaire in Silicon Valley, a woman who'd clawed her way up from a cramped studio apartment to the penthouse of her own 50-story building. She'd sacrificed everything for success: sleep, friendships, and nearly her marriage. But the one thing she'd never compromise on was her son. 7-year-old Marcus was her heart walking outside her body, and after losing her husband to cancer 2 years ago, he was all she had left. That morning started like any other. Sarah was reviewing quarterly reports in her top-floor office when her assistant's frantic voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Chen, you need to come to the lobby immediately." "It's Marcus." Her blood turned to ice. Marcus had been waiting in the building's child care center while she finished an early meeting. Sarah's heels echoed like gunshots as she sprinted toward the elevator, her mind racing through every parent's worst nightmare. The 40-second descent felt like an eternity. When the elevator doors opened, she saw her son on the floor, crying, with the janitor, an older man she'd seen mopping floors but never really noticed, kneeling beside him with his hands on Marcus's shoulders. "Get away from my son!" Sarah's voice cut through the lobby like a whip. She rushed forward, pulling Marcus into her arms. Security guards materialized from nowhere, their hands already reaching for the janitor. "Ma'am, I was just trying to—" The janitor started, his weathered face pale with shock. "I don't want to hear it," Sarah snapped, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear. Marcus was sobbing into her shoulder, and she could feel a knot forming on the back of his head. "You put your hands on my child." "Security, escort him out." "He's fired." "Please, Ms. Chen, if you'd just let me explain—" "Now!" Sarah's voice echoed off the glass walls. "I want him out of this building immediately, and I'm calling the police." The janitor, she'd later learn his name was Robert Martinez, didn't resist as security led him away. He just looked back once with an expression that Sarah would later recognize as profound sadness. Not for himself, but for what she was about to discover. Sarah rushed Marcus to the emergency room. He'd stopped crying but seemed dazed, complaining of a headache. The ER doctor, a kind woman with graying hair, examined him carefully. When she felt the bump on his head, her expression shifted subtly. "Mrs. Chen, I'd like to run an MRI just to be safe." "An MRI for a bump on the head?" Sarah's heart rate spiked again. "It's likely nothing. But Marcus mentioned he's been having headaches for a few weeks. You mentioned that to the nurse, right, Marcus?" Sarah froze. "Weeks? Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" Her son looked down, his small fingers twisting together. "You were always busy, Mommy. I didn't want to bother you." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she pushed the guilt aside. "Let's do the MRI." An hour later, Sarah sat in a consultation room, staring at images she couldn't fully comprehend, while the doctor explained something that turned her world upside down. "Your son has a brain aneurysm." "Mrs. Chen, right here," the doctor pointed, to a bulge in one of Marcus's blood vessels. "It's small, but it's in a critical location. The bump on his head this morning, that could have ruptured it." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Could have?" "Mrs. Chen, I need to understand exactly what happened." "You said someone caught him when he fell?" Sarah's mind reeled back to the lobby. She'd been so focused on Marcus crying and the janitor's hands on him that she hadn't processed the full scene. Now, fragments returned. Marcus's small body crumpled on the marble floor, the janitor's careful positioning of his hands, the way he'd been supporting Marcus's head and neck with precise, deliberate care. The way his head was being supported when you arrived, the doctor continued, that kind of stabilization, it may have prevented sudden movement that could have ruptured the aneurysm. Mrs. Chen, if that had ruptured, we likely wouldn't be having this conversation. We need to schedule surgery immediately, but your son is extremely lucky to be alive. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. The janitor. He saved Marcus's life? I can't say for certain without knowing exactly what happened. But proper neck and head stabilization after a fall with a condition like this, that's not common knowledge. That's training. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, calling her head of security. The janitor we removed this morning, Robert Martinez. I need his file, now. 20 minutes later, while Marcus was being prepped for surgery, Sarah sat reading a personnel file that made her feel smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Robert Martinez, 62, former paramedic with 30 years of service, retired after a back injury made it impossible to continue. Took the janitorial position at Chen Technologies because his pension wasn't enough to cover his wife's Alzheimer's care. Certifications in emergency medicine, pediatric trauma, CPR instruction. There was a note from the building manager she'd never seen. Robert has assisted in 3 medical emergencies in the building. Keeps his skills current. Exemplary employee. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing the scene in the lobby again with new clarity. Marcus must have been running, dizzy from the headache caused by the aneurysm. He'd fallen. She could see the scuff marks on the marble now in her mind. And Robert, mopping nearby, had immediately recognized a potentially serious head injury. He'd stabilized Marcus's neck, kept him still, checked his pupils, all while trying to keep a frightened child calm. And she'd called him a threat, fired him, threatened him with police. The surgery took 6 hours. Sarah sat in the waiting room, her empire forgotten, her emails ignored, every prayer she'd ever learned running through her mind. When the surgeon finally emerged, the relief that washed over her was so intense she nearly collapsed. The surgery was successful. Marcus will need time to recover, but the prognosis is excellent. Sarah broke down then, all the fear and guilt and gratitude pouring out in racking sobs. When she could finally breathe again, she had her assistant track down an address. 2 days later, Sarah stood on the porch of a modest house in a working-class neighborhood, Marcus beside her with a bandage wrapped around his head. She'd rehearsed what to say a dozen times, but when Robert Martinez opened the door, every word evaporated. Mr. Martinez, Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Robert's expression softened. How's the boy? Alive, because of you. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. The doctor said you saved his life. You stabilized his neck after the fall, and he had a brain aneurysm if he'd moved wrong. I just did what anyone with training would do, Robert said quietly. No, Sarah shook her head. You did what a hero does. And I treated you like a criminal. I can't, there's no way to. She stopped, realizing apologies were insufficient. Please, will you come back? Not as a janitor. I'm creating a position, Director of Building Safety. Full medical benefits, a salary that will cover any care your wife needs. I should have seen you before. I should have seen so many people. You taught me that. Robert looked at Marcus, who stepped forward shyly. Thank you for saving me, Mr. Martinez. Something shifted in Robert's weathered face. Your mama loves you very much, son. Sometimes people make mistakes when they're scared. That's just being human. Sarah realized then that Robert wasn't just teaching her about seeing people, he was teaching her about grace. 3 months later, Chen Technologies launched a new initiative. Every employee, from executives to maintenance staff, now wore name badges with their full titles and brief bios. Sarah had instituted regular company-wide meetings where everyone, regardless of position, could share their stories. Robert Martinez had become not just the director of building safety, but a grandfather figure to Marcus and a friend who taught Sarah that true wealth wasn't measured in billions. She'd learned that the people we overlook, the janitors, the security guards, the maintenance workers, aren't invisible. They're humans with histories, with skills, with hearts capable of extraordinary compassion. And sometimes, the person cleaning our floors might be the very person who saves everything we hold dear. Sarah kept a photo on her desk now. Marcus and Robert, both smiling, taken at the hospital on the day Marcus was discharged. Beneath it was a plaque with words that had become her new mission statement. Success is nothing if we fail to see each other's humanity. The scream that had echoed through her lobby that morning had indeed changed everything, just not in the way Sarah had first imagined. It had torn down the walls around her heart and taught her that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from the people we never thought to notice. And the most important lessons come from the moments when we're most humbled by our own mistakes.